Comparison is the biggest thief of joy, and on first glance you'll see something that resembles a Disco Elysium clone. Despite knowing that and still taking the plunge to make a game like this is incredible. Spending years to craft a game that will be endlessly compared to one of the greatest pieces of art in gaming is nothing short of insanity. Yet even with this double-edged sword, Esoteric Ebb wields it proudly. It refuses to shy away from its predecessor, for both good and bad. It has all the intention in the world to try to make you understand that it is its own game. And so we have the biggest question: does it succeed or does it fail? So let's go on a journey and figure out if Esoteric Ebb meets the expectations it sets out for itself. Welcome gamers to Gas or Trash. Let's address the disco-shaped elephant in the room, with Esoteric Ebb considering itself a disco-like. Comparing the games side to side, the comparison ends immediately. The only thing disco-like about it is the camera, with both the vibe and art styles being vastly different from each other. This also reflects the different tones of the games. The main draw of Disco Elysium is that it's a grimy murder mystery that is a deep dive in political ideologies and human psyche. And while Esoteric Ebb has those elements, it is nothing but misdirection to what this actually is. You are first and foremost in a Dungeons & Dragons world, and like in every good campaign, there is political intrigue to characterize all the NPCs you're going to be meeting. Unlike its predecessor, the focus here isn't on political ideologies. Yes, they're present in the game, and yes, there is an election at the end of the game. It is mostly just there to get you interested in the political factions that are in the game to help you decide which faction you want to side with during that playthrough. But despite it being a more shallow experience, there is more fun building your individual cleric, as each stat represents their own ideologies. But I'll only cover the main ones. Strength supports the Nationalists, Dexterity supports the Freestriders, Wisdom supports Asgilists, while Charisma represents being apolitical and an opportunist. And while these stats certainly do help when it comes to following a certain path, they're by no means required. I haven't been entirely truthful, however, because the unfortunate reality of Esoteric Ebb is the first few hours feel like an exact ripoff of story beats from Disco Elysium, which is such a shame because this game thrives when it does its own thing. Esoteric Ebb isn't just a love letter to Disco Elysium, but to Dungeons & Dragons as a whole, which is why it's so baffling that it decides to hamstring itself with the label of disco-like. The moment it decides to step out of its predecessor's shadow is when the game truly opens, when it allows you, the player, to fully engross yourself into this Dungeons & Dragons environment. Whether it's through delving through a dungeon or interacting with the locals. Rather than feeling like an intruder in this game and world, I feel like the developer personally invited me to his D&D table, which gives me an entirely different playstyle. I'm no longer thinking what fits the character, but rather what my own D&D cleric would actually do in these situations. This causes an immediate shift in what I'm expecting. Not only that, but what I'm also excited about. Rather than expecting this grand political story, I'm instead surrendering myself to the DM, while I try and find little tidbits of lore and story from each of the NPCs. With that shift in mindset, I also want to see failure. Dungeons & Dragons isn't always about successful rolls, and Esoteric Ebb does a really good job to making failure fun, even though at times it's incredibly stressful. Rather than having to put a skill point in order to redo a roll, instead we get a finite amount of rerolls through shards of yore. You could potentially brute force a certain outcome, but continuous failure will build up your exhaustion, making the checks harder if your health hits 0. Even if you should pass your death saving throws, unless you hit a natural 20, you will be getting a point of exhaustion. This leads into a balancing act of if you want to keep brute forcing an option, or deciding to make calculated risks, especially because the dice aren't always kind. Failure with certain skills can also lead to some of the funniest outcomes in the game. Sometimes you don't even need rolls in order to get those situations. Nice to meet you, Snell. Perform a traditional goblin salute. What is that? You raise your arms up into the air as one should when greeting an uncivilized child. No, I didn't mean to do What the fuck are you doing? I didn't mean to do that! I didn't mean to throw up gang signs! You can immediately tell that the D&D elements are not just tacked on. Even the website tells you point blank that this game is based on Christopher's own homebrew setting. This is a game that appeals to D&D nerds, which for someone like me is a great boon, while for others it may cause a barrier for entry. And if you enjoy fantasy, Christopher does not try to reinvent any of the races. Orcs, goblins, and dwarves are all consistent with their fantasy tropes, obviously with some nuances mixed in. And if you're privy to any of this, it allows you to feel right at home. The downside is, if you don't have any of these previous experiences, the flood of information might be too much for you. Not just that, but it might even be harder to get into the mindset that the game requires. This can cause an immediate divide between players. Those with a D&D background and those without will have different expectations. Those with will embrace the story with open arms. It makes it easier for those players to fully embrace the lore and the other systems involved. Meanwhile, those without could struggle to figure out all the information that the game is giving you. So what does all this amount to? Esoteric Ebb is a visually beautiful game with an incredibly rich story. A game that doesn't belittle its players, nor attempts to handhold you into making decisions. Your successes, failures, and everything else in between are all your own choices. And most importantly, a full package game that doesn't demand a single cent from you other than what you initially paid for. A honest-to-God rarity in the modern age of gaming, but still a game that tried to live in the shadow of a masterpiece, rather than believing itself to also be a piece of art. Ultimately doing a disservice to itself, as well as those who expect more from what they know. While the term disco-like is what initially pulled me in, Esoteric Ebb could not be further away from it, and it deserves to stand proud on its own merits. Aside from Baldur's Gate 3, this is one of the best representations of Dungeons & Dragons in gaming, and brings me back to an era of gaming that I know and love. And while I spent a good time comparing it to a piece of media that I love with Disco Elysium, the joy I got from Esoteric Ebb was not robbed. While my experiences and thoughts will be vastly different to your own, at least for me, I could say that Esoteric Ebb is certified gas. And I'll even go further in saying that it'll be my 2026 Game of the Year. I can't recommend this enough for RPG enjoyers and Dungeons & Dragons lovers. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me and this channel, check out my Patreon down below. Thank you to my current patrons, Marble Moonstone, Famine, Yeetsy, Colton, Ari, Cal the Newt, Koki, Jonathan, Karma, Mebit98, and Yes Man. I appreciate it if you guys like, comment, and subscribe on the video, and I hope to see you guys very soon. I also stream regularly on Twitch at twitch.tv/MoemiRat. Till next time.